I'd been through 17 years of Mondays at Meridian Technologies, and most of them blurred together. Same stale coffee, same clacking keyboards, same quiet head nods in the hallway. But that Monday morning, something felt off before I even stepped into the building. The air was too still. My badge didn't beep on the first try. Little things, Daniel's assistant told me he wanted to see me right away. Urgent, she said, avoiding eye contact. I stepped into his office and immediately saw Vanessa from HR already seated. That was all I needed to know. I didn't sit, I didn't speak, I just waited. Daniel adjusted his tie. He couldn't look me in the eye either. "Jake, we're restructuring," he began, and I almost smiled. That word, restructuring, was corporate code for execution. I heard the rest in a blur. My role was no longer aligned with their direction. The company appreciated my service. My departure would be effective immediately. I nodded once. "I understand," I said. My voice was even, controlled. No outburst. No begging. No demand for explanation. 17 years just like that. I walked out of his office without another word. Vanessa said something as I passed, maybe offered me a number to call or papers to sign. I didn't hear it. My footsteps echoed in the hallway like I didn't belong there anymore. I passed the break room, where the same cheap pastries sat under plastic wrap. Someone laughed in a nearby cubicle. Life went on. At my desk, I stood there for a moment before touching anything. This little corner of the 12th floor had been mine for nearly 2 decades. I'd watched the company rise, shift, evolve, while I stayed right here, fixing what broke, building what no one understood, training kids who barely knew how to run a backup. I sat down, took a slow breath, and looked at the blinking cursor on my now disabled login screen. No warning, no explanation, just the end. I returned to my desk like a ghost retracing his old steps. No one spoke, but I could feel eyes flickering toward me, then quickly away. The same people I'd helped debug code at midnight, who I'd stayed late for when their servers crashed, now stared through their monitors like I no longer existed. I opened my drawer and started packing without thinking, my hands moving slower than usual, as if the weight of each item had doubled. The first thing I touched was the cactus, small, stubborn, and somehow still alive after 17 years under this building's fluorescent haze. It had outlasted 3 CEOs and 2 IT overhauls. Next came the mug. A crooked ceramic thing with lumpy paint and the words, "Bo One Dad," smeared in blue. My son had made it in high school art class. He's 28 now. I ran my thumb along the chipped edge and placed it gently in the box. Then the photo. Andrea and the kids, taken at the lake that summer I almost missed because of a server. Migration. Everyone was sunburned and happy. I stared at that frozen moment longer than I should have. Behind me, someone cleared their throat but didn't say anything. I didn't turn around. The silence had a shape now, tight and sharp. Bethany from marketing eventually approached, her heels clicking unevenly. "Jake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just heard. It's ridiculous. You practically built this place." I shrugged. Companies change direction. She blinked like she expected more, maybe a rant, maybe tears. But I had nothing to give. As I closed the last flap on the box, I stood up and looked around one final time. My entire adult life had been lived in this square of carpet, surrounded by cables, blinking lights, and people who stopped seeing me the moment I wasn't useful. I walked past Daniel's office on my way out. He was standing just inside the doorway, arms folded, watching. No wave, no apology, just surveillance. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a glance. 17 years, and I left without a sound. I wasn't the most brilliant person in the room. I wasn't flashy or loud, but I was always there. I showed up before the sun, stayed after the cleaners left, patched systems while others slept. I wasn't just part of the machine. I was the machine, humming in the background while everyone else moved on with their careers, their raises, their titles. I started at Meridian when the company occupied 2 floors in a rented space with flickering lights and vending machines that jammed every other day. Back then, we still used dial-up modems and shared drives that crashed if you sneezed too hard. I built our first backup architecture using second-hand tape libraries and nights spent eating stale pizza at my desk. When cloud computing became the norm, I didn't resist it like the others. I learned, quietly, efficiently. I migrated our systems without fanfare. When new hires panicked at 2 a.m. because a system update broke something they didn't understand, I was the one who picked up the phone, even if no one remembered the favor later. 3 CEOs came and went. Each brought in their own people, said their buzzwords, made their changes. But I remained. They all needed someone to keep the lights on behind the curtain. I trained their hires, answered their questions, fixed their shortcuts, and the offers came. Bigger titles, more money, fresh starts. At least 4 major firms tried to pull me away. One flew me out to New York, gave me a tour of their data center, introduced me to the team I'd be leading. I turned them all down. Not because I didn't want more, but because I believed in finishing what I started. I believed in loyalty, in building something that lasted. That belief cost me promotions. It cost me visibility. It made me too easy to ignore. I became background, useful, but invisible. They assumed I'd always be there, like the humming of the servers I maintained. Now, looking back at that office I'd just been pushed out of, I felt a shift. Something cracked inside me. Not a break, but a reconfiguration. The kind that happens when the system fails just long enough for you to see how fragile it really was. Loyalty had made me a fixture, but now it made me a fool. And I wasn't going to be a fool anymore. He showed up in one of those perfectly tailored suits that made you wonder if he'd ever spilled coffee on himself. Jason Phillips. The kind of guy who said ecosystem instead of network, and called our department a digital touch point in his very first meeting. His handshake was firm, his smile tight, and his resume came with words like Stanford and McKinsey, stamped across it like security clearance. Daniel introduced him as a consultant to help modernize operations. I nodded and welcomed him like I was supposed to, but I knew the moment I shook his hand. I was looking at my replacement. He never asked about legacy systems or infrastructure, never once requested documentation or training on the architecture we'd been refining. For years. Instead, he started attending leadership meetings I wasn't invited to. When I passed by, their voices dropped, their screens dimmed. The language shifted too. Suddenly, we were talking about leaning out operations and streamlining redundancy. Funny how I started feeling like the redundancy. About 2 weeks after Jason arrived, I noticed my admin access had changed. Small things at first. A folder I used daily required extra permissions. A routine script triggered a security block. I logged the changes, ran silent audits, and said nothing. It was all traceable, all deliberate. Then came the exclusions. Team meetings I used to run were now led by junior staff. Bright kids, good intentions, no clue what they were walking into. I was copied on fewer and fewer project threads. By the time Daniel emailed a company-wide memo about a new systems strategy without even mentioning me, I understood fully. They weren't just pushing me out, they were burying me. But I didn't protest. I documented, quietly, thoroughly, every modified credential, every policy change, every access log that didn't match the official story. Jason moved in with the grace of someone who knew his place was already secured. But I'd seen people like him before, parachuted in to solve problems they didn't understand, rearranging furniture while the foundation cracked beneath them. I wasn't going to stop them. I was going to watch. 2 weeks before they fired me, I was running a routine scan on our financial software. Just one of those background tasks I always did without thinking. It was the kind of work nobody paid attention to anymore. The kind you only notice when it breaks. That day, something caught my eye. A payment flag. Not a red alert. Nothing dramatic. Just off. A vendor name I didn't recognize. Apex Solutions. Group, a generic name, forgettable. But something about the pattern of payments didn't sit right. They weren't huge, at least not at first. $5,000 here, 12 there. But they were increasing steadily, month after month, and always just under the threshold that would trigger automated reporting. I flagged it, stored a copy of the logs, and moved on. At the time, I still thought maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was a new vendor no one had told me about. Maybe Jason had authorized it. That was the thing. I was already being frozen out, and I didn't know what I didn't know anymore. But I kept the files. I always kept files. That night after I got home from being fired, I went straight to the garage. Andrea didn't ask questions. She just gave me space like she always did. I opened the locked drawer of my old file cabinet and pulled out a small fireproof box. Inside, labeled in Sharpie, was a flash drive marked Archive 3 Finance. When the company's legal team had asked me to help design an insider threat protocol years ago, I'd insisted we keep off-site backups for high-risk data just in case. They signed off on it, then forgot about it. I plugged the drive into my personal laptop, the screen casting a faint glow across the darkened room. I pulled up the vendor details, payment schedules, approval trails. Each entry confirmed what I'd suspected. Apex Solutions Group had no website. The listed business address pointed to a UPS store in a strip mall on the outskirts of town. I cross-referenced the business registration, something most people wouldn't think to do. The listed owner, Thomas Wilcox. I sat back slowly, letting the name settle. Wilcox, as in Brian Wilcox, our CFO. Thomas was his brother-in-law. I remembered him from a holiday party years ago. Wore a Bluetooth in his ear the whole time. Barely spoke to anyone. They weren't even hiding it. Just burying it deep enough that no one would notice, unless they were already suspicious, unless they knew where to look. The house was quiet in a way I wasn't used to. No email notifications, no early calls, no list of tickets waiting to be cleared before noon. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of Andrea moving around the kitchen. She brought me a cup of coffee without a word, placed it gently beside my laptop, and left the room. After 19 years together, she knew when I needed space. I stared at the steam rising from the cup, feeling more displaced than angry. There was no panic, no fury, just the stillness of a man no longer needed. The weight of it all sank in. No office to report to, no system to maintain. After nearly 2 decades of structure and routine, I was untethered. And yet, I didn't feel broken. Just aware. I sat there for a long time, my fingers tracing the edge of the mug. It had a small chip near the base, one I'd never noticed before. Funny how the smallest cracks go unseen until you're forced to stop and look closely. I didn't want revenge. That wasn't what this was, but what they did wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a violation of trust, of responsibility. I'd given my time, my loyalty, my skill, and they threw it away to protect a lie. That couldn't go unanswered. Not for me. Not for the people still inside, who didn't even know they were standing on hollow ground. I took a sip of the coffee. It was just the way I liked it. Hot, bitter, honest. And I knew exactly what needed to happen next. The next morning, I sat in my car across the street from Meridian's headquarters. The same building I used to enter before sunrise, badge flashing green, now loomed ahead of me like a sealed vault. I didn't miss it. I just observed it differently now, like an engineer studying a flawed machine. My laptop sat open in the passenger seat. No distractions, no noise, just one email window and a blinking cursor. I drafted the message carefully, short, vague, just enough to unsettle. Subject line: financial irregularities, urgent review requested. I addressed it to Daniel only, no CC, no BCC. I included 3 payment references tied to Apex Solutions Group and a sentence about discrepancies in vendor approvals. I left out the connection to Wilcox. That was intentional. I wanted to watch him squirm first. I hit send. Then, I waited. 15 minutes passed, 30. At 43 minutes, my phone rang. Daniel's number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was breathless. Jake, this email. We need to discuss what you've sent. Call me back immediately. I didn't. At 10 past the hour, An email from Vanessa in HR popped up. Corporate. Language cloaked as concern. Mr. Wilson, we've received communication from you that may violate the terms of your exit. Please refrain from further contact with employees or confidential data, or legal steps will be taken. They were trying to corner me, threaten, contain. What they didn't realize was I'd never signed a separation agreement. No NDA, no gag. Clause. They'd been too quick to discard me, too arrogant to notice the loophole they'd left behind. I archived the emails, saved the voicemails. Every message, every threat, every shift in tone, documented and stored. They thought I was just a disgruntled ex-employee firing warning shots. They hadn't realized I wasn't firing anything. I was just lighting the fuse. The first time I searched the business registration for Apex Solutions Group, I assumed I'd find a generic contractor or a vendor name that had simply slipped through cracks in the approval process. But seeing Thomas Wilcox listed as the owner wasn't just surprising, it was clarifying. Thomas wasn't just a name, he was family, Brian Wilcox's brother-in-law. That kind of coincidence doesn't exist in procurement chains. I dug deeper, pulling every line item from the past 24 months. Connected to Apex, the numbers told a story. A slow ramp-up in payment amounts, inflated license renewals, charges for services that no one in IT could recall ever using. Then I searched the name of another vendor I remembered seeing, Lakeside Business Solutions. I hadn't thought much of it before, but now everything felt suspect. That one traced back to Patricia Wilcox, Brian's wife, 2 shell companies, 2 family members, both funneling funds out of the company through inflated or phantom invoices. I checked the address, another mailbox rental. No staff, no website, no actual operations. I sat back in my chair and let it settle. This wasn't negligence, it was orchestration. Elegant in its simplicity, just real enough to pass casual audits, just padded enough to turn legitimate transactions into theft. And the more I looked, the clearer it became. The approvals for both Apex and Lakeside came through Brian himself. No oversight, no double signatures, just quiet manipulation of a system he thought no one would question, because no one ever had. I pulled Jason's file next, the so-called consultant. His contract had been signed in less than 48 hours through an emergency procurement loop, completely bypassing our standard vendor evaluation process. The justification? Strategic transformation. No quotes, no reviews, just Daniel's approval. Jason wasn't just there to fix systems. He was there to remove an obstacle. Me. The pattern was simple. Clear out the veteran who built the infrastructure, replace him with someone who didn't know where the wires were buried, and let the money keep flowing. What they didn't expect was for that veteran to be watching long before they made their move. They fired me thinking it was cleanup. They didn't realize they'd pulled the trigger with the safety off. Night settled over the neighborhood like a soft, indifferent blanket. Streetlights buzzed faintly outside my window, casting long shadows on the floor of my home office. I sat alone, the cursor blinking on my screen, waiting for the final keystroke. Everything I needed was ready, organized, backed up, clean. They never revoked my credentials. It wasn't arrogance. It was sloppiness. Jason had no idea how to execute a full transition protocol. Access logs, shadow accounts, system-level permissions. He didn't even know where to look. It wasn't malice, just inexperience dressed in confidence. I logged into Meridian's system through an unlisted testing gateway I'd built myself years ago, an emergency backdoor for internal use. No alerts, no audit trail. I moved like a ghost, not touching anything but what I came for. At exactly 7:43 p.m., I uploaded the report, a full forensic analysis, vendor transactions, business ties, email records, approval chains, timestamps, IP logs, everything, tied together line by line. Evidence that didn't just suggest corruption, it proved it. The message was addressed to every board member, 12 names, 12 inboxes. Subject line: Pre-bonus financial irregularity review, critical action. Required. Then I set the delay. The email would deploy at 8 a.m. sharp, just before the quarterly board meeting where bonuses were to be reviewed and approved. They'd be gathered, seated, unaware of the storm about to land in their hands. There would be no warning, just a document that could not be ignored or brushed aside. I closed the terminal, logged out. The silence in the room felt different now. Not empty, but resolved. The kind of silence you hear after fixing something broken for too long. They thought they'd erased me, but I'd only stepped into the walls. And from there, I left behind a message they couldn't delete. Morning light spilled across the porch as I sat with a fresh cup of coffee, the same mug from my desk now resting comfortably in my hand. It was 8:01 a.m. The email had been delivered 1 minute ago. I didn't check my inbox. I didn't refresh news alerts, I just waited. By 8:17, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, then another, and another. I let them all go to voicemail. I didn't need to answer. I already knew what was happening. At 9:03, I got a text from Stephen, one of the junior analysts I used to mentor. Jake, police are here, Wilcox and Daniel in separate rooms. Phillips looks like he's going to throw up. What did you do? I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a simple response. Just watch the logs. By 9:30, I finally answered a call from the company's legal counsel, Patricia Graves. Her tone was polished, controlled, but there was tension just under the surface. Mr. Wilson, we need you to come in and discuss some information you've shared with the board. I'm available by phone, I said calmly. This really requires an in-person. No, it doesn't. I let the pause stretch until she exhaled. The board is taking this seriously. Several executives have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Your cooperation is appreciated. I've already cooperated, I replied. Everything I have is in that report. Everything I know is backed up, and if anything happens to me or my family, those backups go straight to the SEC, the IRS, and 3 journalists I trust. More silence. Then finally, understood. I ended the call and stepped off the porch into the sun. Somewhere inside, the glass tower, the walls were caving in. Conference rooms once filled with executive swagger now echoed with questions no one could spin away. The systems they built on greed had finally choked on the weight of their own secrecy. They'd thought I was just the quiet systems guy. But now they all knew. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. By Monday, the headlines had hit the local business news. Meridian Technologies executives under investigation for financial misconduct. No names yet, but anyone paying attention could read between the lines. And inside the company, no one was guessing anymore. That afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Robert Chen, one of the board members I'd respected back in the day, the kind who read every audit report and didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. Jake, he said, the board would like to meet tomorrow morning, executive floor. I didn't answer right away. I think he knew I wouldn't jump. They're creating a new role, he added. Chief Information Security Officer. You'd report directly to the board, no more filters. The next morning, I walked through the front doors of Meridian for the first time since they fired me. The security guard did a double take, then quietly printed me a visitor badge. Welcome back, Mr. Wilson, he said, almost sheepishly. I rode the elevator to the top floor. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm when people are still trying to understand what just happened. 10 board members sat around a polished table. The interim CEO, previously the COO, looked up as I entered. Her voice was calm but careful. Mr. Wilson, thank you for coming. The situation you exposed, it's far worse than initial reports suggested. I waited. We're offering you the new executive position. Full oversight, independent authority, name your terms. I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside, my conditions, non-negotiable, independent budget, full audit access across all departments, veto power on financial tech decisions. She, glanced through it, raised an eyebrow. This is unprecedented. So was 5.2 million in embezzlement, I replied. This time someone watches. Robert nodded. The board agrees. You have until noon to decide. I already have, I said, and stood. As I left the room, I caught the eyes of two former colleagues through the glass. Their expressions weren't fear, they were respect. 6 months later, I sat in my new corner office overlooking the Columbus skyline. The city looked different from this high up, quieter somehow. Maybe that was just me. The chaos had passed, the investigations had run their course. The money had been traced, most of it recovered. Wilcox had confessed, Daniel had lawyered up. Phillips had fled to Brazil before being extradited. And me? I wasn't angry anymore. I'd done what needed to be done, not out of revenge, but because someone had to. Because trust, once broken in silence, festers in the dark. Now nothing would go unseen again. That was my job, my responsibility. Stephen ran day-to-day IT operations now. I'd promoted him. He had potential, just needed someone to see it. I'd made sure he was never invisible the way I had been. At lunch, Andrea stopped by the office, smiling as I grabbed my jacket. As we walked past the team, conversations dipped just slightly. Not in fear, but in quiet recognition. These people knew what had happened, and they knew I could have let it all burn. But I didn't. I saved it, quietly, methodically, with the same thoroughness they once ignored. That evening, I logged into LinkedIn for the first time in over a year. I didn't post a speech, no victory lap, just one line. Never burn bridges, just let them collapse under the weight of their own greed. Andrea saw it pop up on her phone. She chuckled and looked at me. Feeling poetic? I smiled back. Just done. The bridge had fallen, but where it once stood, I'd built something better. Stronger, wiser, and this time it had my name on it.